Hello friends, I am Vinay Krishna, founder of Pingala Software. It's a Bangalore-based startup. We are working on cutting-edge technologies like AI, ML, IoT, blockchain, DevOps, cloud agnostic solutions, and so on. So welcome all to this webinar. The theme of this webinar is DevOps and New Trends. Today we have with us Chris Riley. He's a DevOps advocate and advisory and research at Splunk. He's passionate about connecting the dots between modern technology and real business use cases. He spends his time connecting with practitioners and vendors to understand how technology is used to increase application quality and release velocity. We are privileged to have him today in this webinar. So welcome, Chris, and thanks for finding time to join us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
you. Yeah, and for all the participants, I just wanted to tell you, right, if you can keep yourself muted throughout this webinar, it will be always helpful because that way we will be able to reduce the noise or any type of disturbance so that everybody will get benefited with the discussion with Chris. And the way we are going to do is like there will be some question answer session here, and that will take almost like 45 minutes. What we are trying to do in rest 15 minutes is as and when you are finding some queries, doubts, or anything, if you can put your questions into the chat window on this same webinar that GoToMeeting, and then we will be collecting those questions, and we will try to get those things answered in last 15 minutes. So that is what we have planned, right? So without further delay, let's start the our today's discussion. So Chris, I would like to ask you a very basic question. Maybe for all the people who are new to this will benefit them, as well as if you look at, there are lots of things which is going on in the different form or different type of definitions. So it will always good to know those basic things from an expert like you. So from your perspective, if you have to define like what is DevOps and why do we need it, so how will you take this one? Like if you have to just provide basic things on that, could you please take this question?
So it's interesting because a lot of people you'll talk to say that everybody has their own definition of DevOps, and I honestly don't agree. I don't agree with that at all. I think that a lot of people, what they're challenged with is a lot of people are expecting there to be a checklist or a certification or, you know, some here's your DevOps thing and you're done. And that's actually completely contrary to what DevOps actually is. And so I think that that's why a lot of people don't generally accept there being a single definition. I think there's actually two definitions of DevOps, and I break it into two components. One is something that's for everybody. There really is no excuse. You could be running mainframe COBOL applications and still be doing DevOps, and that's DevOps the principles. DevOps the principles are the same principles most all of us have held, which is I want to release software faster at a higher quality. And through that, naturally, some of the biggest challenges associated with that has been the interaction between developers and IT. And that is a people challenge. It's a philosophy challenge. And so this first definition of DevOps is very philosophical. It's a mindset. It's making developers customers as a part of the organization. It's making them self-service. And it's also understanding that somewhere in the organization, someone has to steward DevOps across the organization. So that's the first one. And that's relevant for everybody. If you're used to having a waterfall delivery mindset, then you know that's going to transform with this model. The second one is DevOps the function. So DevOps engineers, even if you don't have a DevOps engineer, you may have a release manager who is embracing some DevOps practices. And the DevOps function is all about automation, and it's all about treating your delivery chain as a product. So your delivery chain is not just the thing that pushes applications across. Your delivery chain is a product in itself that you deliver to the organization. And the goal of the delivery chain is to get code, compress the time from developers creating the code to releasing the code. So it requires a lot of robust testing. It requires a very robust CI/CD process. One could argue that CI/CD is the heart of this, is the heart of the DevOps function. As organizations progress, then you start to see things like microservices, Kubernetes, SRE. The SRE model is very important in the modern DevOps environment. SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineer. And so that is the function piece, which may not be something that every organization can take on right away. So that's how I see compartmentalizing DevOps. And I think anybody you talk to, it's true that they're going to be discussing one of those two. Now, this gets to your last part of your question, is why does it matter? Well, the reason it matters and why we need DevOps is that's it. It allows us to have the conversation. We've been talking about Agile for a long time, and Agile is a function within DevOps. It is a mode of operation. You could argue that DevOps replaces ITIL, ITSM, but at the bottom line, if you are concerned about releasing software faster at a higher quality, then you're already thinking in the mindset of DevOps. And the reason we call it DevOps and the reason we need it, like all of this terminology, the big hot terms right now, another one is observability, is so that we can have the conversation. You can't really have a webinar about the modern practices of application development unless you put a label on it. And I think even in the early days of DevOps, I remember 7 years ago when I was transitioning from being an advocate of ALM, application lifecycle management, into DevOps, I was one of the first people to say that the DevOps term made no sense. I was one of the first critics, and now I'm a big champion. And it all came down to, this allows me to have conversations about how to deal with modern application development versus traditional monolithic type application, binary, shipping binaries type application development.
Great. And it's really nice to get the overview from a person who was in the early days a critic, and now he is an advocate of DevOps.
Right. Yeah, my development days have long passed. I was, by the way, my development was as a .NET developer, and I specialized in OCR software.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so yeah, it's good to know and understand also, because I really liked one thing which you have actually tried to differentiate the two type of definitions, and that is where people are mostly coming up like, okay, this is what the definition is, or maybe they are more focusing on the function side and they are thinking about that is what the DevOps is. So thanks a lot for clarifying that part. So another thing is like, we also get lots of myths around DevOps, right? You might have also experienced, if you could name some of them, and you can just let us know that what is how we can brush those myths also, because that is very important. Yeah. If somebody is actually thinking and in that line, it can lead them to a wrong direction, right? So I just wanted to understand if you have come across some of the myths which is there in the industry related to DevOps, right? Say for example, something we are talking about DevOps means we don't need ops guys, no ops, or we are talking about like development has to do that operation job as well, or we are talking about like operation has to write a development code as well, right? So maybe I am just giving you some of the myths which is there in the industry. You could have come across with something more than this, or maybe more you can say like getting more and different type of myths as well. So if you can just highlight those things, it will really beneficial for the audience.
Yeah. So you did already hit 2 or 3 of those there, but the first one I'm going to start with, the mother of all myths in the DevOps space, is you're not going to be Google, you're not going to be Twitter, you're not going to be Netflix. It's useful to learn from those organizations. It is not useful to try to mimic or emulate them. Now, that's absolutely no criticism on the organization and how advanced your engineering team is. It has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with, your application simply, most likely, does not have the transaction volume that a Google, a Twitter, a Facebook, and a Netflix does. And because you don't have the same transaction volume, you're not dealing with the same problems. So your problems are in the same space, but they're not exactly the same. So their approach is not going to 100% apply to you, but it will guide you. So SRE is one of those. Red metrics, which is a monitoring approach standard, could be one of those, but it's also one of the most misleading when it comes to supporting your application. There's other aspects of how they deploy their applications and manage their applications and build their applications that aren't going to be a one-for-one split, but parity to you, but they're useful to know. The other one is shift left. Shift left has a lot of challenges. And with shift left, you can't, sorry, my daughter just popped in here, just randomly. Hold on one second. I'm going to have to, these are the, sorry about that. So shift left is, is another one of those where everyone's saying developers are going to take on more responsibilities and maybe control of the environment. Now, shift left absolutely is happening, but it doesn't mean that your developer is suddenly the tester or your developer is suddenly the DevOps engineer, because you can't shift left without building a framework for shifting left. And a lot of people think that you just dump this all on the developer and that's what it means, and it's not. You hear a lot, you build your code, you run your code, you support your code. That is absolutely true, but it only works in environments who have all the automation, end-to-end automation to support that, and testing, which also means that there's a team of people who are supporting those developers to build that. Now, the reason shift left matters is accountability. That's really what we're saying when we say shift left. We're saying the developers are more accountable for what happens in production than they are today, and there's more automation that give them that accountability. So that's another kind of misconception out there. The other thing is that the monolith is not, DevOps doesn't mean the monolith goes away. And there's some in between as well. It also doesn't mean you have to go to Kubernetes. It doesn't mean you have to go to microservices. It has to be the right choice for your application. So maybe stateful applications make sense for your application or components of your application. And I don't want teams to think that they're behind in the DevOps journey if they're not 100% microservices cloud natives, because there's only a few companies that are like that. I mean, just a handful. And those are the unicorns. But it doesn't mean that organizations that haven't completed that spectrum are behind. The final myth I want to say is that you're never done. DevOps doesn't end. There is no implement DevOps, be done. You can't implement DevOps in a waterfall way. So DevOps is something that is a framework that you use ongoing, which means that DevOps also has to be ready to adapt.
Add some more things on the same trend. Like I have seen a couple of years back when I was part of one large scale transformation into for one of the organization for their product. And we started that transformation after a couple of months. I got to know in one of the email that, and we were doing a DevOps transformation, and I heard something that this particular task will be done by the DevOps team. And I was surprised. Oh, if you have already the DevOps team and what they do. When I start finding out that who is that team, I got to know that manager was telling that it's the same ops team. Now we have rebranded them as a DevOps.
Right. Yeah, you see
Right.
that, and you see that a lot. DevOps, the DevOps persona tends to be usually as former developers who want to move into more of a management, strategic type function, because a lot of DevOps is also strategy. But you also see companies going, oh, let's just rename our ops team to DevOps without creating a mandate that they actually have to help the developers. And so their developers still submit tickets into an ITSM system to get their virtual machines, and it's not DevOps. And that will always self-correct itself. Unfortunately, having the foresight would be better, but that will correct itself very quickly, because again, you can't release software faster at a higher quality by doing the same practices.
Yeah. And Chris, then another thing is, now when we see that this role kind of like a DevOps engineer, right, which is there in the industry, we find mostly those type of people are coming into getting that role, who are earlier IT engineer or release engineer or support ops guys. Those are taking that more in
Yeah,
that case. But I just wanted to know who could be the right person in that case, right? From your perspective, like it could be, it is just for those guys, or it can be like from development team also somebody and can be playing that role. And what should be that role of that? What is the primary responsibility for that particular?
yeah, that's a great question. Actually, hiring for DevOps is very interesting. A lot of companies doing it correct, and a lot of companies not. So the first thing I'd say, generally, what you find is that the most DevOps engineers today were former full stack developers. The next most common scenario was quality engineers. And I'm distinguishing between quality engineers and quality assurance. Quality engineers because they were part of application quality, but they weren't doing manual testing. So, they were building Selenium scripts, they were building the automation in Jenkins, etc. They will transition into a DevOps role. What I think is required, so that is not who they need to be limited to. The third one would be developers themselves. What I think is required is they have to have an understanding of the entire stack. So they have to be full stack. It generally is not going to work great if they're a front-end developer or just a back-end developer, and that's their experience. Back-end in a single programming language. They have to have a holistic point of view of the entire stack, and thus an understanding of the delivery chain. The other thing is they have to have an aptitude to be very strategic. So one of their jobs is to create the automation, but the other job is to steward that automation across the organization, which requires building strategies. And then the third component of that is they have to be able to engage with a diverse set of personas, ops, developers, SecOps in many organizations, because security, DevSecOps is a big thing, which requires good communication, oral and written communication skills with those team members. I think there's an opportunity for anybody who has the right mindset and interest to move into DevOps. I think there is certain aptitudes that fit very well. The reason quality engineering fits really well is quality engineering generally already has a whole big picture idea of the delivery chain that they get to bring in seamlessly into a DevOps practice.
Just a very important point related to the quality people, because most of the time I have seen when we are talking about DevOps, and then that time mostly that type of group of people are looking at like where is our role in that case. Like Dev means development, Ops means operation guys, and where is the quality guys fits into this entire DevOps things, right? So that's very valid point, and I completely agree, because they are able to see that end-to-end things completely, and they are responsible for the entire quality. They have to play a very big role in that case. Yeah. And you have also touched briefly on SRE part. I have seen lots of people are talking about in the if you go to the Google and Google those words, right, you will find that people are talking about like DevOps is being used in Amazon. Google has come up with SRE, and SRE is more better than the DevOps, or DevOps is better than that SRE. So how do you see these two terms and how they are interlinked? Anyway, you have given us a small hint on that, how it is on the side, but yes, of course, if you can just uh, give some glimpse on that, like how these two words are not like a opposite of each other, but actually it's complement each other and they can work together, right? Something if you can just highlight on that based upon your experience, that will be great.
Yeah. So a question just came in, and we have 3 good questions, but I'm going to answer this one right now, just because it's SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineer. It is a terminology and a practice that, again, Google created. It is becoming a more and more popular role. It's replacing the ops role in a big way, where SRE is similar to DevOps, is taking over production support of the application, and also stewardship of application quality back from prod into plan, into development. It's very important, because when we talk about DevOps, we have to complete the loop. Now, to answer your question, and I recently got in a Twitter argument just over this. I won't call it an argument, a little debate over this, where there was an article that came out that said that SRE is competing against DevOps. If you go back to the 2 definitions of DevOps, the first definition is the philosophy. And in the philosophy, SRE is a part of that. SRE is the DevOps philosophy. Actually, the more advanced the DevOps environment, you have SRE. That is part of it. If you go into the function, organizations can absolutely have DevOps engineers and SREs. We have seen that DevOps, unfortunately, has been predominantly about development and not prod, which is a mistake, because development should learn from what happens in prod. And so I think that was a mistake of the industry, not a mistake of the term, a mistake of the industry. So if you think about the DevOps engineer of being everything up to production, and the SRE being from production back into plan. Now, how is the SRE different than a DevOps engineer? Well, SREs, in addition to establishing the strategy for supporting complex applications where you really need an SRE, is when you start dealing with microservices in this crazy complexity that's come with modern applications. They will start to establish the monitoring standards. So what you monitor, how you monitor it, so the metrics, and they will also establish what you do when something breaks. Even if developers are on call, the SREs are the ones who are setting the on-call schedules, setting the incident response policies, and how you deal with it. Finally, they're communicators. So their job is to be obsessed with the customer and the customer experience, and they're communicators back into development. So they have to do a lot of communication of what went wrong, doing postmortems, figuring out how to prevent it in the future, maybe creating run books. So the 2 roles are actually very similar. And you can also kind of think of SREs as the quality engineer for production. They're all complementary. They are not competitive with each other, depending on your size of organization. If you're a smaller organization, you may not have a DevOps engineer. You may just have an SRE who's taken on all of that function. That's still correct. Large organizations are going to have both. They're going to have DevOps engineers, they're going to have quality engineers, and they're going to have SREs. And that is true as well. They're not competitive, and I will put a stake in the ground and say that they're not competitive.
Thanks for clarifying, Chris. Yeah, that's really a very hot topic. Whenever I'm going to that online, and I will find that okay, there are 2 groups actually fighting for this, right? Or maybe they are not very much clear that what is this, right? So thanks for that. So I would like to ask another question, which is like, as per your experience, right? Because you were that early adopter or early learner from the DevOps, right? What is the biggest challenge that you have seen when an organization is going to adopt it or going for this DevOps transformation at their site, right? And that is also for a large scale when we are going for a product which is having of lots of teams, big teams, bigger groups are there, bigger different departments are there for each of the function areas, right? What is the biggest challenge that you have seen, and what is yours, or you can say like a recommendation in that case to overcome with that?
Yeah. So, and I want to make sure that we define this properly. So we're talking about engineering teams that are, say, 100 plus developers, right? Larger. Okay.
That's correct.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and that matters a lot. That matters a lot in this, the challenges. So large organizations, enterprises especially, where you have monolithic applications, you have cloud-based applications that are not cloud native, but they're cloud-based. And then you have cloud native applications, and then you have mobile applications. So you have a very widespread, and you have developers across all of those. There's two big challenges that happen, and the first is, and this is the most frustrating thing for any organization to hear, is the cultural challenge. Because the reason organizations hate hearing about the cultural challenge is because it's one of the hardest things to solve. You're dealing with people. I will say that if you start building automation, the cultural challenge will solve themselves, but there's going to be casualties in terms of people leaving. That's, if you're not deliberate about your culture, people will leave during this process because it's going to be too painful. And if it's not deliberate, they're going to get burnt out. So that's the first thing, is the cultural challenges. There are approaches to dealing with this. The biggest one is they don't have to be a leader in the organization, but assigning somebody who is a steward of DevOps, who makes sure that DevOps and the DevOps principles are spread throughout the organization. The second one is the tools problem, and it really becomes a delivery chain problem. There needs to be some consolidation of tools for an organization to be successful at DevOps. The consolidation needs to happen at the pipeline level. So any of the tools across the pipeline, in my opinion, and it's not always possible, but in my opinion, ideally are consolidated, which means your release automation tool is consolidated, your testing tools are consolidated, your on-call, your incident response tools are consolidated, your monitoring tools are consolidated. The reason is because the pipeline level tools are going to be the one that everybody needs to have familiarity with, because that's the glue. That's what butters across your organization. If you're using Chef or Puppet for your orchestration, that needs to be consolidated. You need to be consistent there. Now, one of the benefits of DevOps is per development team, per small development team, you can have your own stack. That's fine, as long as you're using the pipeline tools unified. The other challenge is breaking the teams into smaller parts. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to have a monolithic organizational structure and support DevOps practices. Smaller teams are better. You probably heard the term two pizza teams, where the teams may even have a DevOps engineer or a DevOps representative as a part of the team, a quality person as a part of the team, and test and developers as a part of the team. So it's all kind of rolled together. Now, how I've seen large organizations do this successfully is basically twofold. One is you see a lot a shared services component of the organization. Shared services is a team that doesn't have direct responsibility to implementing anything, which is scary for a company because that's a big spend to make without having somebody who's directly contributing to the product. Usually what they do is they set the strategy and the standards for the pipeline, they vet and approve tools, and then they tell the rest of the organization what pipeline tools they need to be using and how. So some organizations, they don't mandate, they don't say you have to use it. What they say is, we won't support you if you don't use it. So if you don't use Jenkins properly, then you're on your own. And that will drive a lot of people to start using the appropriate practices. The next thing that they do is dojos. Dojos are basically educational. They're like micro classes within an organization. They'll go around the organization, they'll conduct dojos on DevOps or maybe another topic, and they will teach them the delivery chain end to end. But they should also learn from them what they're using to better help serve them as the organization starts picking up adoption. So I really like dojos. I really like shared services. They're definitely for the large organization. In a smaller organization, the DevOps engineer or the SRE is doing the same thing, but as an individual. So they don't have the luxury of having departments to implement this.
Great. Yeah, that's really a nice explanation, and I like that dozo thing, because that's a very powerful technique to make everyone getting learned very fast on that line, right? That's we use lots of time when we are working with the development team. Also, we do lots of coding dozo and that type of activities too, and try to build that they should be keep practicing those on their own also. So that's good. The next question which I would like to ask you, anyway, you have a little bit touched upon one of the part. So if you look at right now, and if I will go back 7 years back when the DevOps was a buzzword, right? Now, if at this point it's not a buzzword, but yes, of course there are a different way to adopt that, and that is quite okay, because each organization culture and their need is different than the others. That is perfectly fine. But at the same time, now we are finding lots of new buzzword like DevSecOps. We are hearing data ops. We are hearing AI ops. Something
Yep.
like so.
Observability, no ops. You said no ops earlier. I kind of ignored that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So how do you see that? We are every
Yeah.
6 months or 3 months
It's a
we are
lot.
getting something different, like, right?
It's a
I
lot.
don't know whether sometimes it will come like a IoT ops also. Right?
It's
So
too
how do you
much.
see this? Like, how do you see this when you are looking at like a DevSecOps, which is right now I'm finding like lots of organizations are actually being on that line based upon their need, of course. But are we keep adding the new words there with the ops, or how is it
Yeah.
being taken in the industry?
Yeah. Um, this is a great question. So vendors are very guilty of trying to own a new category to differentiate themselves. As you'll find out very quickly, I'm referencing another Twitter response I had. It never turned into an argument because they never responded to me, but I heard a new term called fleet ops. And I'll use that as an example. So fleet ops popped up on my feed. I said, nope, that's not a thing. And here's how I came to that conclusion. And this is what I encourage everybody who's a discerning individual in the tech field to do. Look at it from the perspective of the problem. So first thing I did when I saw this article on fleet ops, I said, I went to the middle of the article because I had to get to what problem did they say they were solving. Then I said to myself, is that problem different than another industry accepted term that we already have a conversation around? And the answer for me was no. The problem they said they were solving was managing a collection of applications versus a single application. And they wanted to tie DevOps to the single application and fleet ops to the collection of applications. But the practice of DevOps applies no matter how many applications you have, because DevOps is centered around the delivery chain, and the delivery chain shouldn't care what application is going through it. So that was my argument to it. There are too many terms. The industry weaponizes the terms. It's not fair. It's not right. You have to navigate it. The big ones right now, SRE is one, site reliability engineer. Observability is a one. I'm getting behind observability, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with anybody as to why. AI ops is one. In my opinion, AI ops is interesting, but it is also part of DevOps, because what AI ops is talking about is making DevOps and automation less human interaction. That's AI ops. The data ops is DevOps for databases. You have continuous learning. You have, you know, a whole slew of these. One of the questions was on cloud native versus cloud based. Yeah, cloud native is different than cloud based applications, and we can touch on that as well. So you have to learn what to accept. Generally, for me, there has to be a critical mass. There has to be amount of maturity. But most importantly, the term has to talk about a real problem. And I always start with the problem and then work in, does the term adequately cover a set of practices and tools to address that problem? If it does, I will adopt the term. I will be okay with it. But you have to be extremely discerning, because you're right. Now that DevOps, I say, has become boring, which is great because we're talking about solving real problems, vendors are eager to come up with the next thing, and there's going to be a lot of flops. So it's challenging, and I'd be happy. I do this internally, disambiguate these terminologies. Happy to do that for anybody, because I think it is a tragedy that we are in that position where we have to be confused just by the term that somebody uses.
I agree because most of the time that, as you told, like vendors has to come up with something, and yes, they have actually tried something which has worked in that domain and that place, and they have defined in that way, like AI ops or data ops we are talking about. Actually, it's just a kind of DevOps in the domain of like a data related applications, or we are talking about AI related applications. There also we are trying to see that can we achieve those things, whatever the practices are there from the DevOps perspective. So actually it's a DevOps only. We can have that within that bigger DevOps. We can just have like a, we are sticking with like a data ops or DevSecOps or something on that line. Yeah, I completely
Yeah,
agree with that.
yeah, DevSecOps.
So
I didn't touch on that one. That is a thing, and it is important, but it also is just part of DevOps. It's the reason it's important is the early stages of DevOps kind of had this wing it mentality. Just release your software and hope it goes well, but respond quickly. And security is critical, as you've seen with Zoom and everything. And the reason DevSecOps is an important thing is because security is being neglected in a lot of places.
right. So I have one more question for you. So as a DevOps advocate, right? What do you see? How do you see that? How do you foresee that the new trends in DevOps in 2020? What
Yeah.
type of trends
Okay.
you are able to visualize, right?
Um, so we're going to go back into terminology, and I'll try not to contradict myself too much. Kubernetes and microservices are clearly becoming the de facto standard for net new cloud native applications. And I say net new because you can break a monolith into microservices using the strangler pattern very successfully, but it's an effort, and you have to ask yourself, is it something that's worth undertaking? DevSecOps, for the reasons I said, you see a lot of new tooling coming around DevSecOps. It's still a largely unaddressed area. The reason it's such a big deal is because now that developers are moving faster, they're introducing more zero-day and vulnerabilities into their applications. So you have to catch these sooner so that somebody doesn't catch it for you. Observability is a huge one, and I really buy into observability a lot for one reason. Monitoring is not sufficient. The term monitoring, which is more of a go and investigate approach, is not sufficient for complex applications, microservices, and Kubernetes. The observability concept is all around how do you monitor something that is not stateful, is stateless, may live and die very quickly, maybe even serverless, and interconnected, so that something that breaks in one service may not be actually the true problem in the application. It may be further down in the application layers. So that's what observability addresses. It's largely a term, but it allows you to have a conversation about something that traditional monitoring can't address out of the box. So I think these are big. Serverless is big. I've caught myself every year. In 2018, I started saying this is the year of serverless. I said it in 2019. We've yet to see the year of serverless, largely because application architectures have to be completely changed to support serverless structure. But serverless is key, which attaches to the other trend of API first development, leading with your API, building your API before you build anything else, not as an afterthought. You need that for serverless, and I think that that's a necessary, natural practice for building applications these days.
Yeah, and fine. I am really interested in exploring more on the observability side also, because that's really one thing which I feel that going to be more important, because we are finding by getting into a microservices world, or maybe the serverless side, it's very important to observe and not only just a monitor to see that what is the actual cause for that, which is going to be very complex to identify and find out, right? So do you have anything like from the tool side which is right now people are using for this purpose or something, Chris? You
For
came across something
serverless,
on that? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, obviously the public cloud providers are going to be the leaders in giving serverless functionality, monitoring around serverless. There's a lot of observability tools specifically designed to monitor serverless applications and handle the production side of serverless. That's true with testing, although largely your testing practices don't change with serverless, but the testing needs to be external from the application, looking internal, not as a part of the application. You don't want to build Selenium unless you're using serverless to do Selenium testing. You don't want to build it into your functions directly necessarily. So it's a growing area, but the nice thing about serverless is the dependencies are far less than they ever used to be, which is great for everybody. And I think that trend will continue.
Okay, okay. So yeah, fine. I'm almost done with my questions, and now it's almost like 15 minutes left for the questions which audience
Yeah,
has
great.
or participant has put here. So I will start reading, and we'll see that how much we will be able to cover. So Srikanth Ganesan has put one question which is right. Challenges in DevOps or adoption. He is actually just putting his use case, like we are in safe from Jan 2020 and evolving. We have DevOps in our ART, Agile Release Train, and SRT, Solution Release Train. Is this correct DevOps in both levels?
So the first challenge I see here is you've literally given three separate practices, and that's a kind of contrary to DevOps, which is a single practice, and the single practice being again that pipeline centric point of view of delivery, which butters across the entire organization. Because after DevOps is value stream management, which is the idea of tying your application functionality directly to revenue, the revenue that it generates for the business. So I think what you have here is you absolutely have the right intent. Your goals are the same as DevOps, but I wouldn't call that largely a DevOps practice, because it doesn't have a unified methodology, and that's what is required. And I think there's another question that's related to the same exact thing, something about DevOps being a part of Agile or glorified Agile or whatever. No, it's different because it is multidiscipline. Maybe that's the biggest way to look at it. It is multidiscipline. It's not just developers. It's not just ops. It's not just testing. It's all of it. It's about the pipeline.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, okay. So we will take that another question. When we talk about DevOps implementation perspective, in most of the programs, ART focus remains to CI/CD pipeline. How we can connect continuous monitoring piece handled by ops to contribute quality of release.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the fact that,
yeah,
that you're thinking about that, and I think we've answered part of this a little bit, but the fact that you're thinking about that is critical, because the feedback loop, if you don't have the feedback loop, you've already kind of cut off half of the principles of DevOps, which is you have to learn. If you don't learn, you can't get better and you can't improve your delivery chain. So if you have a good monitoring tool, that monitoring tool should also start monitoring at the plan stage. There's no reason, if you have a high quality monitoring tool, not to have Jira data going into it, Jenkins data going into it, etc., to get a full picture of plan all the way to prod. So not just prod, which means that you have to share. So you need to build dashboards that are relevant for the individual teams, and you need to share that. Then somebody, and this is usually in newer organizations, this is the SRE's function, will communicate and connect those dots between all those dashboards and be like, listen, you increase the number of releases. So instead of releasing bi-weekly, you're releasing weekly. That's great, but let me show you how that's increased production issues. So we need to figure this out because you're causing more problems than good. So should we go back to bi-weekly? So that is a communication challenge, and you really have to have somebody to do that. And ideally, that's going to be the DevOps engineer or the SRE. But the first thing is you have to get beyond this ops hoarding the monitoring data. They have to share it. And it only helps them help developers if they share it.
yeah, I agree. And I will just want to add one of my experience long back when I was working for one of the bank for getting a continuous delivery state. What we have done there is we started like a three amigos technique to make business development and testing together to discuss on any of the new type
Yeah,
of user story or epic. We started adding the fourth amigo ops guys there, ops and support guys,
right?
who started giving
Yeah,
lots of valuable points, like they need this type of logs, or they are not getting that logs which is human readable, right? They are not able to understand those from that, right? Even though that continuous monitoring is there. And there are lots of things like, okay, if you are touching this piece, you make sure that these things should be taken care, right? So it was helping them, and they were prepared well that, okay, these features are going to be part of and which they need to monitor, right? So, and much ahead of time they were doing that. So that is something we need to look at. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, if what you told that is correct, like if they are thinking in this particular thing, they are in the right direction. Right.
yeah,
So I also got one question like what it takes to become DevOps engineer from quality assurance. So
yeah.
how a quality
So
guy become a DevOps engineer?
yeah, I like this a lot. I I've been a really big fan of test automation. Let me first distinguish between quality assurance and quality engineering. If you're a manual tester, obviously, the first thing is you have to learn how to code something. You have to have an engineering mindset. It's unfortunate, but you have to. You have to. Quality engineering, if you already have that engineering mindset, the cool thing about that role is you're already there. USA Today, one of the biggest news sites in the US, did an amazing job of taking the QA team and making them a DevOps team. And the reason you're already there is because you already have a full picture of the delivery chain. So the hardest problem is that quality engineers are generally not good at communicating the value of what they do across the organization. So depending on where you are in the organization, if you're a leadership function, hopefully you have a way to push that, because quality engineers actually are very well suited to jump in as a DevOps function. And what they're doing is they're taking on additional responsibility of not only automating the tests, but automating the delivery chain and communicating it. So the additional job is getting really good at communication. And that, unfortunately, is a skill set that a lot of testing groups do not have. So that is an important thing to learn and work at.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. Uh, I also used to have this statement like if you are in the DevOps, right? No matter which function you have to write a code. So if you are just a tester, you have to become an automation engineer where you will write a code. If you are ops guy, you have to write a script to make sure that whatever you are doing is automated. If you are a developer anyway,
Yeah.
you are writing code, so you have to follow all the best practices, which is for the writing a good code. You have to make sure that you know and understand those things. So only thing is
And
your
I'm
specialization
sure,
is different.
yeah, and I'm sure you've heard the term T-shaped individual, which happens to be a term I do not
Yes.
like, but it's accurate. Unfortunately, engineers need to have better communication skills and better understanding of how everything they do ties to the business and building automation and so forth. So you have it spot on. All your questions and your points have been fantastic.
Okay. So another question is like production support guys cover the SRE work or professional production support guy will cover SRE tasks. So who is responsible for that? Production support or professional production support? I don't know what is it, but who should be the who will be the SRE engineer, you can say, or who could be the best person for that?
Best person for SRE. My answer is almost exactly the same as the DevOps engineer. It's
Yep.
going to be somebody who understands the full stack. It's going to be somebody who it has to be somebody who's been on call before. Because if you've never been on call, you don't know how painful it is. So it has to be somebody who understands that and can build strategies around it. But it has to be somebody who has a mindset where the customer is the most important thing. They have to be obsessed with the customer. So take exactly what I said for DevOps engineer and which I think is pretty much the same, and put it as a production. Could be somebody who's already in your support organization, could be somebody who's a DevOps engineer and wants to be an SRE, could be a quality assurance engineer, um, but they have to meet those criteria. Yeah, man, the questions here are fantastic. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them, but I have to say the person who said that if we don't follow DevOps in our agile methodology, calls it fragile. I love that.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic.
So would you like to take this question?
Um, well, so I will say that DevOps doesn't replace Agile. Agile is a method for conducting meetings and how you can run your sprints, how you run your PIs, your product planning. So Agile is a meeting methodology and a workload methodology, whereas DevOps is, again, a practice across the entire organization, which includes developers. It's multidiscipline. So Agile is great for everybody. Business leaders should use Agile practices so they have more efficient meetings. It doesn't get rid of it. They go together. They're necessary. You have to have both.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to add here. I would not like to tell just like it's a just a kind of mechanism to have a meeting, but it's a giving you a way of collaborating better
Yeah.
for a same goal, right? So that could be used in DevOps also and can get the benefits. Because in case of Agile, that delivery part was missing. They were just doing that sprint and they were just making sure that that working software is ready, but it was not going to be deployed like how we are talking about in the DevOps, the complete one, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely
Okay,
right.
so yeah. The another thing I'm getting a question like, is DevOps not a glorified version of XP engineering practices of Agile? So
I answered about Agile. I don't
yeah.
extreme
So
programming
actually,
at XP.
yeah, he's talking about extreme programming. That's
Oh,
correct. That
yeah, no. No, I think if your mind is there, then you're thinking of DevOps as being a developer only thing, and it's not.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
I agree.
it's not at all. Extreme programming and pair programming, which is one of the coolest things that I love seeing people do. That these are all development practices. These are all design patterns for building your application. They're not. That's not DevOps. DevOps is the entire delivery chain, and there's no reason that these practices have to go away. I mean, organizations who implement CI/CD may still be doing monthly releases, but that's still pipeline focused and more DevOps than just saying, you know, individual how we build our code or how we write our code.
Right. Okay. So I have one more question I can take. So what is your advice? That's a question from Eben. What is your advice to large enterprises who has tools and technologies across the spectrum? What is a good strategy for adoption?
The best that I have seen is what USA Today and Delta. So USA Today is owned by Gannett Publishing, but USA Today is one of their properties, and Delta Airlines. They create a shared services, you could call it a center of excellence, shared services, whatever, but an organization dedicated to stewarding DevOps. They vet the pipeline level tools, and they say, if you're not going to use it, then you don't get support. And people kind of just fall in line after that. And then they run dojos across the organization. This approach, in what I've seen, has been the best way to get DevOps to spread across a large enterprise. And it's necessary to support all of the modernization that happens in the individual teams. A lot of people think that they start by doing DevOps by doing microservices. That's not it. You start by the strategy and the stewardship. And the best has been shared services organization, whatever you want to call it, running dojos and vetting the pipeline level tools and telling the organization that they really need to use these.
Okay. I will just try to see one question which we can take. Okay. The last question. Now the cloud application development involves both infra and application development, and separating them out will bring a lot of delay on process. What should be the approach in master both development and DevOps work?
So I don't know if I fully understand the question. I think the point was that infrastructure is now essentially a part of the delivery chain. Was that?
So what he's talking about is, like, if you look at cloud related development, like when we are building a cloud applications, right? So basically both infra and application development, both are like together, right? And separating them is almost it's going to delay the entire process. So how we will use that, any approach to master both development and DevOps world both?
So depending on your organization, my easy answer is this is the value of containers and microservices. Your application is shipping infrastructure in addition to code. It's not, the application is the code configuration and systems are all part of the application, and they are stateless. That's the ideal. I know that's not realistic. Large organizations like American Express, their approach is that the infrastructure team has one job, providing compute, and which is CPU, memory, and disk. That's it. That's all they do. They will have their own orchestration for that, but that's all they do. The developer has to build that layer on top of it, which is the configuration and the provisioning of the VMs. And infrastructure as code is mandatory. So you have to version your infrastructure. You have to use GitHub to have all of your recipes and scripts and whatever you're using to lay out your infrastructure. And developers need to be intimately aware of what's there. It's usually the DevOps engineer who starts to take on those responsibilities. They're the ones who build the scripts for the infrastructure with the input from developers. And usually when something's wrong, like something configuration issue or missing something, that's unfortunately, that communication can be rocky and bumpy, not because of contention, just because you find out in some very disruptive ways that you're missing something or something's misconfigured. But infrastructure as code is necessary, and you're absolutely right. This is a part of your application. Infrastructure code is a pipeline level activity. So provisioning that infrastructure in your public cloud is a pipeline level activity, which means it's a part of the DevOps function.
Okay, fine. Thanks a lot, Chris, for your valuable time. And we are now at the end of this webinar, right? Hope you have liked this session, and even that participant has got good understanding and they have able to get their questions answered, though we have the limited time here. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah,
and yes, yeah. So
yeah, and I'm happy
yeah,
to be a resource. People can reach out for responses that I didn't. There's great questions in there. If you find me on LinkedIn, I can answer your other questions, or Twitter, or what have you. But this was great. Thank you. It's the closest I'm going to get to Kingfisher Center for a long time, which is a place that I really enjoy visiting. So
okay. So thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. And as Chris has told that you can reach out to him for any further question and answer things, right? And yes, we are going to wind up this. Thanks for joining this webinar, and stay safe, stay at home. Thank you.
all right, bye-bye.